Hey there, and welcome to another episode of 411 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. I'm Justin, this is Danielle, and tonight we're filming actually two episodes, so that's why you're going to see us wearing the same shirts and all that. But we wanted to get some BC Andrews theory videos out, and these are two topics that we have seen in the comments for a long time, or we've been thinking about for a long time, so we thought we'd finally try and get a couple episodes out because, as usual, we're just really busy. But how you doing tonight, Danielle?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited we finally got in front of the cameras.
Yeah.
We missed you guys.
We have.
Really want to talk BC Andrews tonight.
It's so true. And so we're going to start right now. This episode is going to be who started the FOXWORTH Hall fire. Now, it's interesting because, and we have the right to revisit these topics again. And it's more going to be about the next episode we do. But we've been thinking about it, and we haven't quite come to definitive answers for ourselves. So we'll see where we land. But it's interesting because when I brought this up to Danielle, I thought I was going to have to convince her about, I think it's down between Corinne and Kathy. But what's interesting about that is I thought I was going to have to convince her about Kathy because I'm like, well, it's obviously that Corinne started the fire. But you were like,
it's totally Kathy.
right. And I was sort of like, wait, what? How do you think that? I'm like, how, like, I have a great arguments for it. And I'm like, oh, I could see how it could be. But I think it's one of the things that makes it so interesting about us being BC Andrews fans. The things we've learned talking to all of you in the comments is we all love BC Andrews so much, but we really all do have such different experiences. But what's really interesting about this idea is that, a Foxworth Hall fire, it's one of the most iconic scenes in all of especially the original VC Andrews, but I think just in all of VC Andrews' stories, ghost written or not, I think it's super interesting. But you get Kathy at Foxworth Hall, and I always just assumed Corinne did it. Like, she runs out of the library. You have the confrontation, which is obviously one of our favorite moments from the series.
Of course.
And I'm like, she runs out of the library that they're in, freaking out. Chris and Kathy and Bart are like having a conversation, and then they decide to like exit, and they see there's bedlam, and it's clearly coming down from the attic. And I'm like, oh, well, Corin started this. Like, this is just obvious. But I was like, well, I could convince Danielle about some of these other things to make her think maybe it's Kathy so we can do this episode. But you always thought it was Kathy.
I always thought it was Kathy.
Yeah.
So I went back and reread the end again recently, and I think I've changed my mind, but not about Corinne, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Because I may have changed my mind a little bit too, so it's funny.
Of course we did. And that's the beauty of VC Andrews, is that every time I read the story, I get a different perspective or I think about it differently. And that's why she is timeless. Like, there is no end to this. Oh my God, I just love her. Anyway, so as I'm reading it again, there's a line in there where it says specifically, like, Kathy, like, the wind blew in the attic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it never quite says it blew the candle out.
Yeah.
It just spooked her.
Yeah.
Right. And I always thought this. I always thought it was Kathy, but being careless. I don't think she ever intentionally set that house on fire.
Which is where I'm sort of landing, by the way.
But I did before. So there's a slight change there.
Right.
So, like, when I was younger, I was like, oh yeah, she was like, I'm setting this house on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm like, no, her brother was there, Bart was there. Like, I don't think she would have put them in harm's way, especially even though Kathy was filled with revenge. I don't think she would have even put all those people at risk. I just don't. So that was kind of how I fell with the Kathy thing. As far as Corinne goes, it was too quick of a turnaround. I mean, that house was huge, right? So if you're reading the book again and you're looking at the timeline of like events, I just don't think Corinne would have had enough time. I just really don't. And I never thought it was Corinne for that reason.
Well, see, I mean, I always took it from the perspective of Corinne leaves the library. They're all freaking out. Clearly, she is like losing her mind in that sequence. Like, she's freaking, she's been caught, and all the truth is finally coming out. And she knows that, Bart might leave her for Kathy. So she would. You're right. Kathy would not maybe necessarily intentionally put everybody in harm. She didn't know that Chris was coming at that point.
True. Yeah.
And she just, she loves Bart. We all have talked about this, but like, it's her mom, it's her grandmother. Kathy at the end of the book is clearly also losing her mind a little bit, and we'll get into it. But I want to do a little bit more setup. So I was rereading the sort of relevant chapters, and like you were saying, that's one of the things we love about VC Andrews. I think as we do these theory videos, you have to look at the clues that are being presented to you. And I'm looking at like metaphors. And one of the things that, Kathy says about her mother when she first sees her at the Christmas party is that she looks like a lick of flame in this lame sort of
Mm,
red dress that she's wearing, which could mean like Corinne symbolizes fire. Looking at it from like all my years of AP English
mhm,
with looking at Nathaniel Hawthorne's, Seven Garrets and all that, you know, VC Andrews were that type too, to put these sort of clues in that like Corinne could be, a lick of flame, meaning she's going to foreshadow having this flame causing the fire. Or you could also look at it, because this was also why I wasn't AP English, I always argued both sides. You could look at it as that Kathy's got fire on her mind because she just left from the attic.
yeah,
So again, I want to make sure we set this up before we really talk about our different viewpoints, the scenario to remind everybody. So Kathy gets to Foxworth Hall, Christmas night. She first goes up to Corwin's room, is feeling her normal like jealousies, but really into details. Then she goes up into the attic. And one of the things she really focuses on, and I never really focused on this throughout the years, but this theory has been on my mind since we started doing this. It's been like on all
mhm,
the lists. We have a long list of topics we want to get to at some point. We're trying. We really want to get these out to you. But this has been there from the beginning. But certain things had to come first. Who is Heaven's true love? Who's Kathy's true love? Like those had to come first. But this one, even when I thought about it, I didn't realize how much evidence is there. And one of the things is when she goes up to the attic, she focuses on these candles
yeah,
for like a significant amount of time about like we always thought these candles were homemade and blah blah blah, which I don't really recall them ever talking about in Flowers of the Attic, which is fine because this is a sequel novel and it's meant to like emphasize the foreshadowing that's to come, which clearly Virginia Andrews put in this novel for a reason. So she's focusing on these candles, and what you were referencing, and I want you to go in more detail about, is she's up in the attic, she's reading that like message she left, she's trying to sit like in a desk that was Corey's, and all of a sudden the wind blows through and it says the wind came to blow out my candle. She doesn't say the window or the wind came and blew out my
yeah,
candle. She says the wind came to blow out my candle. It's like an exclamation point and she just runs out of there.
yeah.
Well, who knows if that candle was still lit, which is where I think, if we're coming at neither one intentionally set the fire, then I think that's what happened. I think Kathy kind of let it because when Kathy, Bart, and Chris run out of the library, it's very clear in the novel that the smoke is coming from upstairs from the attic. Now, obviously, there's the vengeful Corinne who could have ran out of the library, could have ran up there and done it. But you make a valid point, which is really the point I always thought was that's pretty quick for her to run straight up to the third floor, get to the top
North
of the attic,
Wing,
right,
like,
and set it on fire in the amount of time. If you look at the story, it's Chris comes in, Corey or Chris comes in, Corinne freaks out, thinks it's Chris Sr., runs away. Chris is like, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's true. Yes, it's true. We gotta go. We gotta go. Bam. So if you look at the time, it's maybe 2.5 minutes have gone by. So the
yeah.
fact that like it just doesn't seem really probable. So anyway, now that we've laid the foundation, I just want to emphasize, though, I always assumed it was Corinne. And obviously, the Lifetime movies also did because they went with Corinne and the candelabra. And even in the script, the original script that we talked about, Corinne was the one that set the fire. So I know that there's like a whole bunch of people that must think that, like I think, that I just always assumed that Corinne set the fire. But I was coming up with evidence for why it could be Kathy. And I'm like, maybe it never really was Corinne. Maybe I was wrong this whole time. But what are your thoughts?
The only thing I could think to defend Corinne starting the fire was that at that moment she thought she was going to lose her inheritance, so
Yeah.
she burned the place down.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't think the timing's just not right. Unless VC Andrews left it so that there was some kind of time lapse that we don't ever know about again because she was a great writer,
Right.
so we might know this conversation, but maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes lapsed and we don't know, like it just wasn't written in the story. But I will say that I think it was an accident. I don't think, just after I reread it, I do think Kathy was the culprit because she was lighting candles in the attic. And I actually, when I reread it, also the fireman said it did start in the attic.
Oh
It was
yeah,
specifically in there.
good, yeah,
So I think that was another important piece. And we don't even know if Corinne ever went up there, but we do for a fact know that Kathy went up
yeah,
there. But
it's
we
true.
also know she was spooked. So really, I do think it was an accident overall.
Sure, but I do want to give some now evidence for why Kathy could have intentionally started the fire.
Let's do it.
And I think that, like, again, I feel like there's this sort of metaphor that she's looking at Corinne as like this lick of flame. And I always interpreted that as Corinne is representing this fire that's going to happen. And we know that Corinne is somebody who will kill people to get the results
True.
she wants.
Yes.
Kathy, though, interestingly enough, she is the one who's gotten out. But if we're in Kathy's point of view, and Kathy is seeing her mother like this, Kathy's got fire on the brain. And she also says in here, the fire of my dreams is finally
Yes.
coming to fruition, and maybe it's a little bit of self-fulfilling prophecy. But also, one of the other important things, Corinne clearly loses her mind. And, insanity, mental illness has been, developed as a genetic disease. Kathy clearly, by the end of the novel, is also losing her mind. Like it ends in this sort of dizzying way that Kathy's talking about. It's years later. She has chosen Chris. They're living. Petals on the Wind. The novel ends with her like
Setting
being
it.
surprised that the attic of their house in California has two double beds up there. And she's sort of like trying to convince herself, like, even if Jory does find out the truth, I would never lock them up. But I did buy this picnic basket that I'm now holding and it's in my hand. So I think there's something to be said that Kathy's not all there. And it may have been an accident, and I think that is where I'm going to maybe land. I think there's just as much evidence to suggest that Kathy, when she also, as shown in Petals on the Wind, the theme of Petals on the Wind is revenge, and revenge at any cost. I think that like Kathy could have started that fire intentionally, or as the end of the novel is suggesting, maybe not realizing that she's losing her mind, and she's so willing to do this that she does set it on fire, knowing that if plan A doesn't work, plan B is destroy them all.
I do like the the part about the flame. I remember reading that, but as you pointed it out,
Yeah.
yes, that is something we learned in college. Well, I learned it in college, I didn't learn it in high school. Is looking at some symbolism right like
Yes.
that. But we're so attached to these characters. Like for me, in rereading it, I think it was an accident. I
Sure. I mean, it's just as likely.
that is like I said, where I think I'm gonna land at this point. I don't think that's why she went up there. And
But she does have a fixation with fire. I noticed a couple. So the whole chapter with the grandmother, she's got that candelabra with
mhm,
the wax that she's like melting. She like is fixated on Bart Senior, if you will, his lighter and
mhm.
stuff. Kathy's got a fixation with fire, which is from Flowers in the Attic. Goes back that she is. It was like the first thing that Christopher ever respected her on or acknowledged. Like you're growing up, Kathy. You're trying to worry about fire and stuff. Like, is Kathy a pyromaniac? I mean, is Kathy somebody who would just now again, I want to emphasize I focus so much on Kathy on this. I always just assumed it was Corinne. And I'm curious to know out there, and I know that you all have your opinions on it. You'll tell me what you thought. But like what like I was so convinced, like I just always thought it was Corinne. And when the movies came out, I was like, oh, but not even like with a conscious thought of like, they went with the Corinne route. Like I was just like, yeah, of course it was Corinne. They're doing it now that she's doing it with the grandmother and Chris in the room. But sure, yeah, it was always Corinne. That wasn't a surprise to me. So were you surprised when you saw that in the Petals on the Wind
Yeah,
movie that like Corinne was setting the fire?
yeah. I could also throw a wrench in our theory completely and just be like, maybe John Amos did it.
Oh, you kind of did mention
Yeah.
that to me the other day. And well, what were your thoughts on why John Amos? Because I think I had a you you started to say that, then you kind of backed down. I'm like, no, I actually could think of something that would
I
work
mean,
for
he
that.
was evil.
Yeah.
He loved Corinne. She was about to lose everything. He starts the fire. Olivia dies in the fire. And Corinne gets all the money, she's saved, and then he can go tell her later what he did. And
Well, you thought, because, well, you had said that you thought because he was related that maybe Olivia, he
oh yeah,
thought
yeah,
that Olivia might have been
let
leaving him money in the will.
yes,
So he would take this opportunity to, because you started to falter, sort of like, but why, wait, no, Corinne was going to get the money. I'm like, but exactly, if John Amos thought he was going to get the money, this is a perfect setup for like, oh, it was either that girl who just came in, Kathy, or Corinne did this, and I'm going to get the money. Nobody knew, and that was one of the big reveals of Petals on the Wind. Nobody knew that Olivia had changed her will so that Corinne was going to get it, because when it comes out that Corinne has children, she is disinherited from the grandfather's will, so it reverts then to the grandmother, who's now dead, who did not leave her fortune to John Amos. John Amos, she left her fortune to Corinne, which would make sense for If There Be Thorns, John Amos coming in.
yeah. Well, and even to your point, perfect time for him to start a fire. All that money goes to Olivia, so he gets not only Olivia's wealth but
Mhm.
also Malcolm's wealth.
Right, exactly.
So it's the
Yes.
perfect setup. I totally
Yeah.
forgot about like how
I want
brilliant
to
I
make
was the other
sure
day.
she is the one that said this. I'm
I
remembering it, but she did come up with this. You faltered at the you. I will say the other day you faltered at the point of like, but wait, no, Corinne, and I'm like, no, Danielle, that's the brilliant part, because that sets up If There Be Thorns, why he was sort
yes.
of like, well, now I'm going to get the money this way.
Yep.
Yeah, but now again, I certainly never thought about that for years. This one came up with that. Like, that's pretty brilliant. Anyway, so, and I thought
Thank
like it
you.
worked at a lot of levels. Now, again, do I think that, like, do I think that was Virginia's intention? Maybe not when she was writing Petals on the Wind, but it would have worked. When I have to imagine as a writer coming up with these novels, coming up with something like If There Be Thorns, and a character like John Amos, who is like one of the true villains of this story,
Yeah.
the whole story, it would give him a lot of motivation of like and that is what's great about VC Andrews, or at least, I'm not a big fan of cliffhangers. I'm not a big fan of open endings, but I do love that her novels, her stories, they don't have these holes in them, but they have these little hidden pockets
Yes.
within that you can like find something that would make sense, because she doesn't come right out and like say like, the coroner's report determined Corinne set this fire. The cor or
She leaves it to the reader.
right, exactly.
Yes.
And look at that, like for over 30 years, we've been best friends for 25 years,
Yeah.
26 years. I just always assumed Corinne, and I assumed you thought that, and vice versa. So when I brought this up to her, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to try and convince her that maybe it's Kathy. And you're like, wait, no, it is Kathy. I'm like, excuse me,
And then I'm
what?
like, wait, maybe it's John Amos.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
that whole thing came
Yeah.
out. That's the beauty of you can reread. I love to reread her books at least once a decade. I mean,
Yes. Well, yeah, I read it more
if
than
not
that,
more,
but yeah.
but at least once a decade because
Yeah.
every change in my life,
Yes.
you see
Yeah.
things differently based on your experience and as you get older and things like that. So maybe when I was young, I was like, oh yeah, Kathy, like she is, like she started this fire.
Hmm.
And now I'm like, wait, but John Amos is a little tricky person back in the background. So it's like because your life experiences changes how you view things.
Well, not only
So
that, but also doing this channel. We've now
yes,
we have been, when we reread these with a different sort of lens,
yeah,
that we're like, well, wait a minute, this is kind of weird that she keeps bringing up these candles, or we'll think that we know John Amos's
yep,
character, and we've analyzed it and thought about it. And that's the thing, is like, I'm always worried when we film these episodes. We'll give you a little BTS behind the scenes here. When we start to talk about it, I feel like we say the most brilliant things before we start filming. We're like, oh, that makes sense. Beautiful, well said. And then as soon as we start to film, we're like, "Avuba," like words
I
hard,
never would
I
have
speak.
even said that.
Like, right. Like, so that's why I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I was
No, no.
like, wait, no, this was your brilliant thing that you came up with. Anyway, I
Well,
think,
I always say another behind the scenes. I'm like, save it for the video,
right,
and
right.
then I
Then when we
forget
get
anyway.
here, we're like, ah. But I think this one actually, we've gotten out our points. It's an interesting part of being a fan of VC Andrews, the fact that you all have your opinions about it, and I respect each and every one of them, just like I hope you respect our opinions on it. And look at this. We've loved this same story, but we had such different outlooks on this. And I think that all of these are very, very strong, valid points. Reread the book, comment below, let us know, who do you think started the fire. But read what we were saying, like where Kathy is like fixated about
Yeah,
these candles, emphasizing like that the wind may have blown it out. Now, ultimately, you say, you land that you think it was Kathy, but it was an accident.
correct.
I think that's where I'm gonna land too, and I'm changing, and that's hard for me because not hard for me to change my opinion when I have fact. I can always do that. Actually, it's easy because of that. But the whole time for 20, 30 years of reading Petals on the Wind, just assumed that it was Corinne Wren because she's like, she ran out the secret door. And I'm like, well, maybe that's how she got the attic. But I'm like, but logistically, to get all the way up there, do all this,
Especially
start a
heels. Like
fire.
she was in a
Right,
gown.
right.
Women things, right? Like
And
you're
it
not
wasn't
running up
like
in
a
a gown and
comfortable gown.
heels
It's like severe
with a
here.
butt crack.
Right. I
Yeah.
always think of that butt crack. Like, yeah, they mention it, the
But
hint of
don't
butt crack. Yeah.
read the end with the intention of thinking about who started the fire,
Yeah.
and you will actually read it differently as well.
Yeah, and you could maybe land on the other side of what
Yeah.
you thought or what we thought, and that's cool. But I mean, I always just assumed it's Corinne. So then I was sort of like, but I could see it being Kathy. So it's just still shocking to me that you're like, no, Justin, I thought it was Kathy. What do you mean Corinne? I'm like, what do you
Corinne didn't
mean?
start
Right.
the fire.
But I also think there's this, if you want to look at it as like, VC Andrews planned the whole thing. I don't think she did, but say she planned the whole thing, it would make sense. John Amos could
Yeah.
definitely be a contender. We didn't really, Kathy wouldn't have been mentioning him in Petals on the Wind. Why would she? And where was he? And clearly he has been here this whole time,
Yeah.
ending up with Corinne and trying to get her money. Well, this would have been a perfect opportunity. The fact that he was like, oh, well, people are just going to either think it's this crazy girl daughter coming here, or they're going to see Corinne being
Mhm.
crazy over here. I'm going to finally get my money. But again, the grandmother, who it was like the one nice thing she did was like she left it to Corinne. So
Yeah.
even if Corinne did have, which I guess is another sadistic thing now you think about it, not telling your daughter, oh, you can go be with your kids now because I'll just leave you everything. Like she still didn't let Corinne know
See,
that
I
she
just
was
thought of
leaving
it
everything.
differently. I just thought of it like that's so nice because she was like now she can like have kids. Like she
Well,
like I don't know like
I started to think that, then
okay.
I'm like, no, that's kind of sadistic. Oh, by the way, so she's gonna find out because the grandmother wasn't planning to die probably for another couple more years. So
Yeah.
at that point, Corinne's gonna be 50, half her life, and so to not tell her, oh, you could have been with your kids this whole time because I would have left you the money if you'd have just asked me about it, that's kind of
True,
crazy.
yeah.
That's kind of mean to do. Anyway, though, the fact that John Amos was maybe thinking he could get this money, the fact that, oh no, the grandma pulled a fast one, gave it to Corinne, the irony that she was going to get the money anyway. So I think we have these three very viable, people that could have started it. But like you, I do think that where I'm at right now, and it could change the next time I read, could change the next comment I see from one of you. Right now, I'm landing on it was Kathy, but it was an accident. And if you read it, there's the wind blew out the candle, but maybe it didn't blow it out all the way. And you had all their old paper flowers and stuff
Yeah.
hanging. It could have been. I mean, and
Well, and
thinking
candles were crap. Like those were crappy
right.
candles probably. Like
You're
they were
right.
probably up there from
They
when
were
Alicia
homemade
was up
candles,
there.
right? They're home, yes, probably from since.
Yeah,
Sorry if you
so
didn't hear it when she said when Alicia was up there, and probably, and they're not the best candles. But
no.
also, if you think about it logically, the amount of time it would take a fire that to get that big and that big of a
Yes.
house, it would have probably had to happen when Kathy was up there
Yeah.
going downstairs, being dramatic, then being even, getting the confrontation out, which is still one of my favorite moments.
So good.
And our next episode, I promise, is not about Petals on the Wind. It's not about the Dollengangers, but it is, though, one of my favorite moments always is the Petals on the Wind confrontation. And this fire is obviously the thing that changes all their lives forever from there. But
Such so greatly written. And it's still one of my favorite.
I mean, she's a storyteller, she knows how to
She
weave
paints a
this web
picture,
and,
yeah.
yeah, paint the picture. And
Love her.
But what did you all think? Did you always just assume who you thought started the fire? What do you think about these three sort of theories about the Foxworth Hall fire? Please comment below. Please subscribe. As always, we had a blast talking about this, and we'll talk to you soon.
10 minutes or 15 minutes lapsed and we don't know. Like it just wasn't written in the story. But ultimately my thought is Corinne didn't start the fire.
But
Anyway.
was it Kathy? We will have to find out. John Amos